Are you hearing bumps in the night? Seeing mysterious lights in the sky? Are there mysterious red eyes watching you from the shadows? Did you find a strange, oversized footprint? Do you believe in cryptids and the paranormal? Are you afraid of the dark? No? Well, you should be. It's time for Carolina Creepers and Oddities Radio, the bi-weekly podcast that is dedicated to bringing you the legends and stories of paranormal events that occurred in and around North and South Carolina. So pour yourself a drink, dim the lights, sit back, and enjoy the show. And welcome back, all you creepy people. This is Carolina Creepers and Oddities Radio. This is the first show of 2023, and my name is Chris Edwards, and this is my co-host, Jay Gallagher.
What's up, everybody?
And in this edition, we were going to explore the tale of the Gray Man of Pawleys Island. But before we dive right in, let's meet our hosts. So, Jay, tell our listeners a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm a retired firefighter paramedic. I'm your basic family man. My wife says I'm a grumpy old man, but I don't believe what she says half the time anyway. I live here in central North Carolina, and I've had a lot of different interests since I've retired from the fire department. And this is probably the biggest one. How about you, Chris? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, like you, I'm a firefighter, EMT, and haven't gotten to paramedic yet, but I am a firefighter, EMT, living in the northern part of South Carolina, like right near Charlotte, North Carolina, is where I'm at, but you know that. And Jay, how did you become interested in paranormal phenomenon?
Well, somehow, shape, form, or fashion, I've always, except for one house, I've always lived in a haunted house. When I was little, we lived in a haunted house, and the woman that haunted it, name was Miss Sally. And the quick ghost story, I guess you would say, about Miss Sally is she had her boyfriend went off to fight in the Civil War, and he didn't make it, unfortunately. He got killed, and she couldn't bear the thoughts of living without him, so she hung herself from the upstairs banister rail, upstairs. And we would hear footsteps at night, the typical boards creaking and whatnot, but the lights would either come on when you wasn't inspecting it. You could get up to go over to the switch to turn the lights out, and the switch would be in the off position. And you could say, "Miss Sally, would you please turn the lights out?" And the lights would go out. And the same thing in reverse. The lights would be on, and they would go out. "Miss Sally, would you please turn the lights back on?" And the lights would come on. It wasn't a 2 or 3 minute delay in between. It was immediate response when you ask her to either turn the lights back on or turn them off. She never done any harm to us. Just the footsteps and the lights. And once in a while, you would get the aroma of fresh baked bread, and nobody be in the kitchen doing anything, and nobody in my house except for my great grandma knew how to bake bread like that. And at that point, she was so far up in age that she couldn't do much in the kitchen, except stand back and supervise. And as I got older, we moved to Eli Whitney, which is a small community in the southern part of Alamance County. And almost immediately, we're hearing footsteps upstairs. No electrical phenomena, I guess you would say. And we found out that the woman that we bought the house from, her husband had passed away in the house.
Oh, wow. You never told me that.
Yeah, he had a massive heart attack, from what I could gather, and he didn't make it. And 2 years maybe after we moved into that house, my uncle passed away. Now, myself and my dad, God rest his soul, very interested in the Civil War. And my dad had a whole bunch of relics and books and everything. He basically turned the upstairs of that house into a museum, as you well know. And not long after my uncle died, who was also interested in the Civil War, the footsteps upstairs increased. Instead of a, like once a month thing, it was every day. And it happened almost immediately after Uncle Keith passed away. So we contributed that to Uncle Keith's spirit being upstairs in what my dad called the Civil War room.
Right. And I remember one day I was visiting you, and y'all had gone to the store. I was sitting there by myself, and there was just this horrendous crash upstairs, and I knew nobody was home, and that was just like freaky.
Yeah. A lot of weird things took place after Uncle Keith passed away. And my uncle on my mama's side, who was living with us when he passed away, he was a musician. He played bluegrass music, and he played the banjo. Well, one of my granddads on my mom's side, one of his banjos was upstairs and in the Civil War room also. And not long after he passed away, you could go up there and you could just barely hear it, but it was like somebody over there plunking on that banjo. So we figured we contributed that to Uncle Larry. So
Right.
and basically having a whole lifetime of paranormal experiences is basically what really kicked my interest into high gear of it. And I've been, kind of studying it and researching it and whatnot ever since.
Gotcha. So, as for me, my interest really peaked when I was in middle school and we took a trip to Gettysburg. I don't remember exactly what grade I was in, but there were all the stories of the ghost on the battlefield and different things that we saw when we were there. And that's where it kind of started. And then, like you, I've seen some strange things over the years. Different houses I've been into just had some really uneasy energy. My wife's parents' house in Burlington, the downstairs was like that for the longest time. You go down there and just get this really weird feeling of just like dread and just weird, really weak. When I was sitting down there on the computer, I'd just feel really weak. I'd get up and go upstairs and it would be fine. And so, yeah, I've been exposed to some pretty strange things as well.
Yeah. Well, if you remember when we all went to Gettysburg last year, my youngest son, he was up there taking pictures and he called a few things on that we can't explain. I don't know if you remember that or not.
Yeah, he had that app on his phone and he was playing around with it, and there was like a image sitting right beside him in the van. Can a spirit or a ghost predict the weather? Do you think that's even possible? No? Well, ask any longtime resident of Pawleys Island, South Carolina about the Gray Man, and they will tell you this is not only possible, but has happened in the past. Pawleys Island is not only a town, but a barrier island on the South Carolina coastline that is just 4 miles long and about a house width wide. The island is located just south of Murrells Inlet and Myrtle Beach. Local residents that live on that low country beach town know that when they see the ghost, it's time to leave the coast. But why is that? The story of the Gray Man dates back several hundred years, all the way back to 1822. This cloaked figure roams around the beaches of the island and appears just ahead of major storms. which threaten the island. There have been several sightings just before major hurricanes throughout history. One woman claims to have seen the spirit in 1954 before Hurricane Hazel. In 1989, there was another sighting ahead of the devastating Hurricane Hugo, with the most recent sighting being before Hurricane Florence in 2018. Our story goes like this. The story takes place during the Great Storm of 1822. This was back before storms were really recorded and given names. There are several versions of this tale, however. The most popular one is of being a tragic love story. The Gray Man, who was thought to be the fiancé of a local woman on the island, according to the tale, he died during a freak accident while on his way to rejoin his fiancée on his way back from Georgetown. He had disembarked from a ship after being away for several months. Being eager in such a hurry to see his love, they took a short cross across an uncharted marsh. While traveling in this marsh, his horse and manservant came to an abrupt halt and quickly began to sink into the deadly patch of quicksand where he and his horse disappeared and drowned. When the woman learned of the death of her love, she became heartbroken, and after the funeral began to walk that stretch of beach that she and her fiancé used to walk along during happier times. The wind picked up much windier than usual, but it suited her mood, all alone with her sadness, and the whipping wind with the waves crashing by her side. All at once she saw a figure appear up ahead. As she approached it, the young lady could have sworn that it was her lover. Having no fear, she approached him and told her, "Leave the island at once. You are in danger. You must leave the island." And just as quickly as he appeared, he abruptly disappeared from her sight. The lady rushed home to tell her parents about the odd and unsettling story. Her mother and father immediately began to make plans to leave their home. They were unaware of what danger was coming and what they were fleeing from, but they did know that their daughter was a very sensible person and was not prone to flights of fancy. They left the island the next morning before dawn. That night, as they slept in the safety of their inland home, a massive hurricane ravaged the island and destroyed most, if not all, of the houses except one house. The woman and her family house was left unscathed.
Now, Chris, while doing research on this, I found out that in Cape Hatteras, which is on the Outer Banks of North Carolina, about 60 miles south of Manio, there was a similar specter that shows up, and they call him the Gray Man also. And he is more around the Cape Hatteras Lighthouse stretch of beach. And he does the same thing. Before a hurricane comes, he appears to warn everybody to get away. That's been going on for a right good amount of time. I remember when I was living on the coast, I remember hearing this story also. And as long as I lived there, never seen the specter appear. I guess maybe one of the reasons why it was when the storms come at the job that I had, I was dedicated, being at one certain spot. But there's been other sightings of the Gray Man. He's still vigorously patrolling the windswept beach of Pawleys Island, and excuse me, and elsewhere, hence Hatteras. He's also said to appear before catastrophic storms to warn people of impending doom, although the truth may never be known. The spirits seem to come to cause no harm and act as a protector of the people of the South Carolina Grand Strand and possibly North Carolina coast. In the past 200 years, locals say that the Gray Man has appeared before each of the 5 hurricanes to make landfall on Pawleys Island. As previously mentioned before, there was a report, of a sighting preceding Hurricane Hazel in 1954. Now, a funny thing I'll just throw in here about Hurricane Hazel. This storm was so big and so bad that they actually closed the schools here in central North Carolina, and central North Carolina got damaged as well. My pop told me that. Let's see, in 1989, he was again sighted before Hurricane Hugo made landfall, which between these two storms, 119 people were killed. In 2018, his slumber was once again disturbed, and the gray man made an appearance before Hurricane Florence. Now, not a lovesick sailor. On the few different origin stories surrounding the famous gray man, many of which involves the lovesick sailor returning home from sea, some of the belief that he is actually the first owner of Pawley's Island, George Pawley, that died in the 1700s.
So, Jay,
Now,
what?
some of the
Oh, go ahead.
go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Now, some of the research that I was doing, um, some people said he was a Civil War soldier. Some people say he was a sailor that died at sea during a hurricane and wanted to warn his fellow islanders of the approaching storm. So that there's been a whole lot of uh, beliefs of who he is or what he is. So,
So, Jay, why do you think that the
um,
gray man is compelled to warn people of incoming storms?
well, I'm of the opinion that I'm kind of swaying to believe the story of the sailor that got lost that died at sea during a hurricane and wants to warn his fellow islanders of the approaching storm so they won't meet the same fate that he did.
Yeah, I
Uh,
agree.
wh-
I agree with that as well. I've heard a lot of people say different things that spirits have unfinished business on Earth and don't, for lack of a better word, don't go to the light before completing whatever their purpose was on Earth. And if they had unfinished business, maybe he had something to do, and warning all these people from these storms is it. Maybe one day he'll get some rest and be able to cross over.
yeah,
And
hopefully, hopefully so. Um, but then again, he's doing uh, a duty to serve, I guess you would say, for lack of better terms,
right,
and keeping his fellow islanders safe.
okay. And Jay, I'm giving you this question because you actually read the article. I didn't. With a similar specter being sighted at Cape Hatteras, do you think it's the same ghost or a different spirit?
Think he Ubers.
You think he Ubers? He doesn't.
Yeah.
He doesn't fly.
Now, why? I mean, why not? I mean, if you really stop to think about it, Cape Hatteras and Pawley's Island really isn't that far away from each other as the crow flies, as my grandma used to say.
Yeah.
Um, so why not? I mean, ghosts and uh have been, reported to appear at one place and then another place. So maybe his patrol area, I guess you would say, don't just encompass Pawley's Island. Maybe it's the whole entire North Carolina, South Carolina coast.
Right. And if you could get a third location, maybe that with a spirit that does the same thing, or maybe you're right. Maybe he floats between spots as storms come in. But I mean, it's like who
Yeah.
knows?
Well, some people say that the changing barometric pressure has a lot to do with ghosts appearing,
Right.
and
The way the energy manifests itself and whatnot.
e- exactly. I wonder if that would have anything to do with him like showing up at Pawley's Island and then Hatteras Island. I mean, You never know.
Well, it's like just in general. I think time of year has a lot to do with it too, because if you look at it historically, ghosts in general, there seems to be more paranormal activity the closer to Halloween you get than any other time of the year. Anyway, I mean, I know that hurricanes don't generally come on Halloween, but it's something about the time of year maybe, and the like you're saying, the weather conditions, barometric pressure caused by storms that might allow that
Well,
energy to easily manifest itself.
yeah, it's very possible. I mean, and October is still hurricane season, even though they're not as prevalent as they are. Um, like August, September. Well, let me back up. End of August and through September, that's the peak,
Right.
and it drops off drastically towards uh the end of September into October, and
So
it's go ahead.
so maybe the spirit or spirits, as it were, takes September, October. Like I said, they tend to get stronger the closer to Halloween. Maybe it takes that long for them to manifest as much enough energy to appear.
Now,
As far as
that's that's a very good possibility. But if that's the case, why does it seem like with other spirits, is it don't take as much energy as others to manifest?
true, it's a
So I mean,
good question. And why does the
but
gray man only warn people of impending hurricanes instead of all storms, say a nor'easter, in your opinion?
well, with a nor'easter, to me, it can be just as damaging as a hurricane. Even though a hurricane comes in, does its thing, and is gone in say 24 hours, a nor'easter can sit off the coast and beat you to death for 2 or 3 days,
Right.
and cause just as much damage. Um, but my way of thinking, and it's probably the fact, going back to the gray man, you know, the sailor dying in a hurricane, and warning everybody of the hurricane, because the hurricane may be the trigger object, so to speak, to manifesting versus the nor'easter.
Right.
Does that make any sense?
That does. And to me, um, it could be the fact that hurricanes, being like nor'easters and hurricanes, have different barometric pressures and different physical properties. It's a different weather pattern. And if said person was killed during a hurricane, nor'easters are a relatively new weather phenomenon versus back in the 1800s when they didn't really have nor'easters, but they were there, but they weren't like really classified like a hurricane was back then. Everything was a hurricane back then. So
Yeah.
maybe again going back to the science side of it, maybe the physical properties of a hurricane and a nor'easter are different enough to where the ghost only shows up during hurricanes.
Now, 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 believe it or not, when we were living at the coast, we had been there maybe 2 months, and we had a nor'easter come up the coast, and it set off of Kill Level Hills for 4 days and just beat the crap out of the coast. And houses washed in, sand dunes washed away. Uh, it actually undermined Highway 12 going through Nags Head and Kill Level Hills, and they had some road collapse, and they had to go in there and fix that. And I mean, sometimes the nor'easter can be more damaging than the hurricane, which I know it don't. I know that sounds silly, but take it from someone who's seen it firsthand. It can.
Oh yeah, that's not silly at all. That's kind of a known fact that it's a different weather phenomenon, a different type of storm, but they're still just as dangerous as a hurricane, if not more.
Yeah.
Did you have anything else? on the topic today?
Uh, just the fact that if you see the gray man, and get out of town.
Get the hell out of Dodge.
Yes, sir.
So,
Uh,
our references for today's show, the researchers' material was gathered from the following web sources. www.counton2.com, which is WCBD News, and an article by Tim Renaud. It's www.grandpalmsresortmb.com. Then WPDE.com, which is another news station, an article by Josh Davis. And Southern Living, www.southernliving.com, in an article by Megan Overdeep.
and the information that I got come from www.northcarolinaghost.com.
And our final reflection on today's show. It seems to me that the whole moral of the story is, if you see the gray man and you heed his warning, historically, your property will be protected from the wrath of the storm. I actually believe that this spirit is real in this particular case. There is just too much recent supporting evidence and eyewitness accounts to disprove that it is not a real spirit. Jay, what do you think?
I'm going to go believe on this one also. Everything that she said, I agree with 100%. And like I said, even though I lived at the coast and been through hurricanes, I never seen him. But yet, I always got my family out before the storm hit. And our property, knock on wood, always was still standing when we got home. So I'm going 100% believe on this one.
Right. And like you said, the most recent sighting was 2018. That was the last major storm to hit the South Carolina coast was Florence. So just folks, remember, if you see the ghost, it's time to go. And for our next show, we're going to be talking about the ghost train of Iredell County, the story of Boston's Bridge. Don't forget to tune in to the next episode. We thank you again for listening to the show. You've been listening to Carolina Creepers and Oddities Radio. Don't forget to subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, or your favorite podcast platform. If you like our show, please help us out by providing a review. If you would like to contact us, please email us at firefighter274@outlook.com. Until next time, remember, fear not the dark itself, but what may lurk within it. If you stare at the dark too long, you will eventually see what isn't there.